So now let me introduce our speaker for today. A Minnesota treasure. Kevin talked about the fact he'd never seen one that had to do a microphone straight up to be able to talk into it. He thought that was pretty cool. A Minnesota treasure, Kevin Kling. If you've heard Kevin speak before, you know what a treat you're in for. But if you've never heard him speak before, you are really in for a treat this afternoon. Kevin, who was called the Minneapolis Story Laureate by former Minneapolis Mayor R.T. Ryback, is a Minnesotan through and through. Although he wasn't born here, he was raised and went to college here. You may have heard his distinctive Minnesota voice on his popular commentaries on National Public Radio's All Things Considered, or you may have heard some of his plays, such as Tales from the Charred Underbelly of the Yule Log, or the one where I first came to know Kevin, which was 21A, in which he played 8 characters on a bus line, 21A, in South Minneapolis. He's won numerous arts grants and awards, including from National Endowment for the Arts, the Minnesota State Arts Board, the Jerome Foundation, the Bush Foundation, the McKnight Foundation, and many others because of his talents, which you will soon get to hear. What I love is how he draws you in his stories using his hilarious and very touching and tender autobiographical tales. He uses humor a lot, using laughter as a way to pull us all in, and he creates a story that's an image or a situation and then lets us use our imagination, which I think is something that we don't get to do as much today as sometimes, and it's a great gift that he gives us. Because he's part humorist, part poet, and part philosopher, he's a keen observer of the human condition. He shows us that there's joy and knowledge right in front of us if we'll just take a minute to see it and enjoy it. I know you'd rather hear him tell his stories than me talk about them, so it's indeed a pleasure and a great honor to welcome to the stage the Minneapolis Story Laureate, Kevin Kling.
All right, this is impressive. Hello, everybody. You know, I travel a lot, and when people from other countries or other states, they teach you how to say hello in the local vernacular. So I'm going to teach you how to say hello in Minnesota. So if you repeat back, say, hey. Hey. Okay, now take the emotion down about half. Hey. Okay, now drop the volume another half. Hey. Perfect. You may now walk among us. First, I want to just thank you all very much and just acknowledge the GIA, how I'm a recipient of many of the grants that were listed up there, and I just am so thankful that you all are here and that you grant the artists, and believe me, it's not lost on us. We are really, really grateful. And I'm also honored to be here. You never know where you're going to end up when you get these speaking engagements. I remember one time I was traveling with the Guthrie Theater, and I was in northern Minnesota, and we're driving across the north, and we're heading for Hibbing. And we get to Hibbing, and outside of Hibbing, there's a huge lit-up sign that said, "The Guthrie Theater presents Kevin Kling." But the February wind had blown the P away, so it said, "The Guthrie Theater presents Kevin Kling." I'm like, I knew it. And so to briefly, Minnesotans, plaid is our favorite color. We generally eschew the limelight. We don't like it. We encourage our children to take the viola in orchestra and sing alto and choir. And some of us really do like ice fishing. I love ice fishing. And it's not as bad as you think. You're not always out on a frozen lake. Sometimes you're in a little shack about half the size or a quarter the size of this stage, and there's holes in the corner where you can fish, and a stove inside so you're nice and warm. And a buddy of mine told me a couple of winters ago he was fishing, and you never know what you're going to catch when you're ice fishing. So there's some lunkers down there, and all of a sudden, bam, something hit bigger than he'd ever felt. And he couldn't get it to reel in. Finally he got it to come, and he reeled it in, and he looked on the end of his line. It was a license plate, and he threw it in the corner. He ran and grabbed it and ran outside to see the hole in the ice where his truck used to be. last year I was in Ireland, and I was on a boat, and I was trying to get up a ladder, and as you get out, only one of my arms works, and it's shorter, and I only have 4 fingers. I'm trying to get up this ladder, and I'll never forget what the captain said. He hadn't said anything all week, and he turns to me and he goes, "Every man goes out of his mind in his own way." And this is really the crux of my talk here. Later on, I was in a pub, and a man was sitting across from me from Germany, and he couldn't believe I was a storyteller. And I kept going, "Yeah, I'm a storyteller." And he goes, "You just tell stories?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Is there jobs for that?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Do you just make them up?" And sometimes I say, "Yeah, sometimes I do." And he couldn't believe it. So I go, "Okay, if you could tell a story, what story would you tell?" "Oh, I would never tell a story." I go, "Okay, if you would write a story, what would you write?" And he gets all dreamy, and he goes, "A manual." To write something and have someone do it. And so I realized there are story people and there are manual people. So for the manual people, I'm going to apologize, because this is going to be really a story kind of a talk. It's going to be steeped in metaphor and sequence. And so, sorry, manual people, just ride it out. And the Greeks thought of stories like a loom, in that vertically ran the metaphor, horizontally ran the sequence. And where they came together, they wove their invisible threads for their cloaks of immortality. Our stories also teach us how we belong. Belonging is one of my favorite words. Being and longing. Being somewhere, but longing to be somewhere else. A paradox. One of the things us humans do really, really well. I was looking up the definition of resiliency the other day, and resiliency defined as maintaining one's shape. And how do we maintain our shape when it has been compromised? We do it through family, faith, community. We do it through our stories. We do it through our home. I think home is one of the keys. Every hero's journey begins at home. And my dad used to say, "You can go anywhere if you know where you're from." My buddy Al Baker, who's a medicine man up on the Le Coudray, says, "You can survive anything with sense of humor and sense of self." And I agree with that. I think that when a tragedy strikes, that's what we refer to. I noticed that when tragedies have struck across the United States, when the Twin Towers fell, when the bombs went off in either Oklahoma or in Boston, people really reverted to their home, to themselves. Their accents got stronger, they got thicker. The New Yorker really came out in the New Yorker. And I remember not far from here, a bridge collapsed in Minneapolis. And the Minneapolis sense of who we are really came to the surface. There was a man named Hernandez who saved a whole bus load of school children, and he got them off the bus just in time, and he saved these kids. And the TV company came to interview him, but they couldn't find him. He wasn't anywhere to be found because it was dinner time. And when it's dinner time in Minnesota, you go home. And it was just, there he is. That's who we are. A few years back, I was watching Channel 2, and they had this special. Professor Leakey was doing these diggings to see how humans had to change. When the Ice Age receded, we had to change from being herbivores to carnivores. And we had to change as people in order to survive. And he was doing this study. We had to change in 3 ways. One way, we had to increase our vocabulary. Our language skills had to get stronger. We had to increase our tools, make better tools. And the third thing he couldn't figure out, and he looked and looked and looked, and finally, hundreds of miles from the original site, he found his answer. He did a digging and found a woman with brittle bone disease. In other words, she had to be carried from site to site to site, or she wouldn't have made it. And that's when he said he found his third and most important element in our survival, and that was compassion. The Greeks thought that when we were first created, Zeus made us with 4 arms, 4 legs, and 2 heads. But we had so much fun, we stopped listening to the gods. So Zeus, in his anger, split us in half, so now we have 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 head. But we're forever looking for that other half. We're forever looking to reconnect. Oh, I love what Zeus said after that. And if you don't knock it off, you're going down to 1 leg. But when we think of our other half, I think we think, is it a mirror? It's probably not a mirror. It's probably the opposite of what we are. Because sometimes an angel comes down to wrestle, and a hero is only as large as the dragon he faces. And to be honest, balance is really maintaining states of imbalance. According to Gerald Visner, the Ojibwe used to have what were called irony dogs, and they were dogs trained to bark when there was no irony in the room. Looking for the balance found in paradox. This area, to the first people, was a sacred site, and that's because it was where two rivers came together. And where two rivers came together, they felt that it was two spirits coming together as one. The name Minnesota is actually from the Lakota, and it means where sky and water come together, one indistinguishable from the other. And it's what the Greeks would call an oneric space. Now, an oneric space was a space where dream and reality came together, one indistinguishable from the other. It was a place where one could heal, but it was also the place where creativity was born, an oneric space. When I think of an oneric space, I think of my grandparents' farm. I used to love to go to this farm. We had what was called unstructured time, which now they call boredom. But I was never bored on that farm, and I've never been bored since. Okay, I've been to some plays where I wished I was somewhere else, and other plays where I would have fallen asleep if I hadn't been the one talking. But I still have never been bored, and I've got my grandparents to thank. My grandpa was one of those German farmers, as wide as he was tall. In fact, we used to say, if it wasn't for the direction of his buttons, we wouldn't have known if he was laying down or standing up. And there's a story about my grandpa. This sums him up better than anything. And it happened in northern Minnesota where a farmer had 162 acres. He was so proud of his acreage. And one day a Texan was visiting, and this Minnesotan was bragging about his 162 acres. And finally the Texan couldn't take it any longer, and he said, yeah, look it. My ranch down in Texas, I get in my truck in the morning, I start driving, and I haven't hit the end of my ranch till nightfall. And the Minnesotan said, yeah, I used to have a truck like that. That is my grandpa. My grandma was one of those Teutonic farmers, everything in its right place. One of those women who everything was in its proper place, She kind of scared me a little bit, though. She had these huge earlobes from wearing clip-on earrings her whole life, these giant earlobes that scared me in a National Geographic kind of way. But my grandma, her love was never in doubt. And when I was really afraid, I would go to her. I would go to her for help. Because I remember when I was a kid, there were two kinds of fairy tales. Fairy tales I hated and fairy tales I hadn't heard yet. Because it always ended bad for the guy with a disability. I mean, you probably noticed that my two arms are different from one another and probably different than yours. This arm, I only have 4 fingers, no thumb. When I work with school kids, I start out right away telling them, if you want to high five after the show, you're out of luck, but we can high 4 all day. And they usually come up, somebody comes up and we high 4. I tell them that these braces, I wear one of these braces, and I wore one of these my whole life since I was 3 years old, and they slide on and off really easy. And I remember I was learning how to ski up in northern Minnesota, and there was a rope tow that would pull you to the top of the hill, and then you would slide down. And at the bottom of the hill was a huge sign that said, no long hats, long scarves, or woolly mittens on the rope tow. And my brother and I are standing there in our long hats, long scarves, woolly mittens, they don't mean us. And I grabbed onto that rope, and when I got to the top, I found out why that sign was there, because the rope twists as it goes up the hill. And when I got to the top, I went to let go, but I couldn't. My mittens were woven into the rope tow. I finally got my right arm free, but my left arm wasn't coming free, and it's starting to pick me up off the air. I think, man, I got to do something here. So I let go of my brace, and my brace goes flying through the air, and the woman behind me sees it and says, oh, my God, it's his arm. She's down, and people are piling into her. So we did the rope tow trick the rest of the day. That's all we did. A couple of years ago, I was down in Alabama, and I was performing for kids. And I said, if you want a high 5 or high 4, come on up. This little girl comes up. I go, high 4, high 2. She had 2 fingers on one hand. So I asked her teacher, how's this little girl doing in school? You know, she's one of my people. So her teacher goes, okay, let me tell you. She says, it's around Thanksgiving. She said, it's November. So we're doing that project where you put your hand on a piece of paper, you trace around it, and the fingers are the feathers and of the turkey and the head, and you put the beak on it. And she goes, she got a great idea. She said, put your other hand down, and they'll have 2 turkeys facing each other. So the kids did their drawings, and they got them done. And they turned them in, and this little girl, she got to her picture, 1 turkey with all of its feathers and 1 turkey with 2 feathers. Ugh. She thought, if I put this up, will this embarrass her? So the teacher got her next good idea and told the little girl, you can do your drawing over and use the same arm for both hands for the same turkey. And the little girl said, okay. So she redid her drawing, turned it in, 2 turkeys with 2 feathers on both sides. I said, that kid is going to be fine. She said, yeah, she will be fine. And so when I came to my grandma with these fairy tales, I said, Grandma, fairy tales, they always end up bad for the guy with the disability. Snow White trades in 7 perfectly good little ones for 1 big one. And, it's like, it always ends bad. She goes, no, Kevin, a fairy tale can go any way you want it to go. That's the thing about folk tales. They change with the needs of the people. And this is one of the stories my grandma told me. It's back in the days when pots and pans could talk, which indeed they still do. And there was a man that would go to the river every day and fill 2 pots with water. Well, one day it was discovered a small crack in one of the pots. And as time went on, that crack widened until by the time the man got home, all the water had leaked out of the pot. Finally, the pot turned to the man and said, please, every day you take me to the river and every day that water leaks out, please replace me with another pot. And the man turned to the pot and said, look down the trail. And the pot looked down the trail, and on the side of the trail with the pot that didn't have a crack, it was craggy and rocky. But on the side of the path with the pot with the crack, wildflowers grew. The man said, every day you water those flowers, every day you make my difficult journey beautiful. I think I'll keep you. And that's when my grandma would wrap those huge Teutonic arms around me and say, I think I'll keep you. Mary Oliver said, it's not the weight, it's how we carry it. And Johnny Cash said, talent is God-given, but our style comes from our limitations. And I think that's true. I think that's where our style really comes from. One of my favorite Greek gods is Hephaestus. And he was thrown off Mount Olympus as a baby, and he smashed onto the ground and crushed his legs and dragged his broken form into Hades, where he created a forge with the Cyclops. And from this forge, he created gifts for the gods. He created Apollo's chariot and Cupid's arrows, and his shields never were penetrated, his arrows never missed, and his jewelry won hearts. And Hephaestus used his art to take him literally out of hell. And I think that's what the arts do. They take us out of the hell and bring us up into God's again. When I was in college, I wanted to go into the arts. I was a theater major, mostly because the only thing easier than a theater major was a theater minor. And my dad used to try to get me out of it. He would send me newspaper headlines with headlines like, actor starves to death in New York, 2% of the actors union employed, Bob Crane, star of Hogan's Heroes, found stabbed to death in driveway. And he would send me these in hopes that I wouldn't go into the arts, but I did, and I wanted to prove to him that I could get a job in the arts, so I got a job at the Guthrie Theater, and I was so proud, and I got to watch Liviu Ciulei work with his thick Romanian accent, this unbelievable Romanian director. And I remember one time an actor was on stage doing a monologue, and when he was done, Ciulei said, no, more eccentric. So the actor did it again. This time he put a little tick on his face. Ciulei said, more eccentric. So the actor did it again. This time he started to writhe. Ciulei, more eccentric. Now the actor's frothing at the mouth, flipping around on the floor, and Liviu turns to the dramaturg, who's also from Romania, and whispers something, and the dramaturg says, he wants you to stand more in the center. Communication. I can't overstress the importance of communication. So after school, I wrote this play, I wrote 21A, and it literally got me around the world. It got me off Broadway. But the most unique and wonderful place it got me was the outback of Australia, where I spent some time with the Atnamatnya people, the rock people in the middle of Australia. And it really taught me about the importance of stories. First of all, I told them ice fishing stories, thinking it would blow their minds, but it didn't. They laughed like a bunch of Minnesotans, and I said, what's going on here? How do you guys get this? And they said, you have to understand our weather can kill us too, only from the other end of the thermometer. And it created this amazing, similar kind of humor. I remember I was walking with Kling one time, and he points, first an emu runs by, this flightless bird, and Kling goes, fast food. And he points to the land and the landscape, and he says, this landscape is our Bible, it's our encyclopedia, and it's our supermarket. And he doesn't tell about the landscape. He's part of the landscape. And as we walk, he sings it into existence. When the first Europeans landed in Australia, there were 600 original languages, and there was no word for ownership or time. I think of the Ojibwe language. It's 87% verbs. In other words, nothing is what it is, it's what it's doing. Living in the moment as the dreamer and the dream, navigating between the regrets of the past and the anxiety of the future. You take someone out of an oral, that's part of an oral culture, you take them out of the land, and you are literally taking them out of their mind. I think our land, we are people of landscapes. We are creatures of landscapes. We all have our oneric spaces. In 2001, I was in a motorcycle accident, and that's where I lost the use of my right arm. And in that moment of that accident, I had that place where I could follow this sense of peace, or to return to this plane of existence where it was clear even then there would be consequences. And I returned. And you know what? It's always bothered me. Why did I return? Why didn't I follow that peace? And I remember when I was in Australia, it was so peaceful, so beautiful. I wanted to spend the rest of my life there. But my visa was running out, so I knew I'd have to return to the States. But that's when this woman named Ray said she would marry me so I could stay there. I just met her that day. She said, I don't care, I'll marry you. So I was going to marry Ray, but right before my visa ran out, right before our wedding, I said, Ray, I can't go through with this. I got to get back to the United States, to the belly of this beast, where I can do something about this world that I live in. And that's when I found out I need tension in my life. I mean, I'm the kind of guy that wears socks with sandals because I know it takes people off. So I returned to this plane of existence. But my life changed. Somewhere in the underworld, my arm still remains. I returned without the use of my right arm. And that has changed things. I had to get voice-activated software for my computer so that when I talked into a microphone, this was 2001, and it was pretty new in those days, and so it had to learn my vocal nuances. This is when I found out we got nuances in Minnesota. Remember that movie Fargo when that came out? People kept calling the radio station going, hey, what's the deal? We don't sound like that. Oh, God. So I'm speaking into the microphone, and I'm doing the Gettysburg Address because it already knows what I'm going to say. And so I'm going through the Gettysburg Address, and my dog and cat get in a fight behind me. Roo, roo, meow, meow, meow. Roo, roo, meow, meow, meow. And the computer starts writing, how, why, how, why. I think that explains a lot. I think when it comes to the underworld, we're either dogs or we're cats. It's either how or why. When Dante went to the underworld, he called it dis, D-I-S, Latin for the underworld, the place of shadow and reflection, the place we round off the rough edges of torment and desire. Dante knew you can't cure a trauma, whether it's a broken limb, a heart, a promise. The heart especially is an instrument, once broken, never plays the same. But although it can't be cured, it can be healed. And Dante knew this. He also knew dis was a necessary step to paradise. It's also the prefix for words like disability, which doesn't mean inability. It means able through another way, able through the world of shadow and reflection, a foot in two worlds, dis. So I joined this theater company. called Interact here in town, a company of performers with disabilities. And the first day that I'm there, they did this exercise. We went around the room and said, if you could take a pill to take away your disability, would you take that pill? And I was the only one that said, yes, I would. And I thought, I wonder if the day will come when I would rather have the body I have now than the one I used to have. And I couldn't imagine it. But every day I learned something there. There's a group of singers, 4 singers with Down syndrome. They call themselves the Downbeats, and they're wonderful. And I remember we opened a show at Mixed Blood Theater, and Laura Mullen stands about this high. Laura is their lead singer. And I mean, everything went wrong with this show. Like props were breaking, people were forgetting lines, a fire broke out backstage. We got it out pretty quick, but the sprinkler system turned on. People are running into the February night, soaking wet. Ambulances are showing up, I mean, fire trucks. It was pandemonium. And Laura turns to me and says, I can't work like this. There's a woman named Ingrid who has aphasia, which makes it really difficult for thoughts to become words. And Ingrid was a third-year law student when her fever struck, and she has aphasia now. And she said, before her aphasia, she used to feel, I think, therefore I am, but now she knows we come from a deeper place. Now she knows I am, therefore I think. And when she said that, I thought of Rumi's beautiful love poem, before right doing, before wrongdoing, there is a field, and I will meet you there. And why Shakespeare puts the lunatic, the lover, and the poet all together in one, because they all go behind the mirror, what we see as reality. So I'm with this company, and I'm in Australia again, and we do a play called Northern Lights, Southern Cross. And when we're done with this play, 5,000 people on the side of a hill see this play. We're followed by 2 opera stars, Teddy Rhodes and Simon O'Neill. And the idea was when they were done singing, our choir was going to join them in the grand finale. But the Sydney Symphony said they didn't have the music long enough, and would it be okay we could just finish on one of their solos? And they said, okay. You have to understand, when you're a choir of performers with disabilities, we didn't just have that music a couple of weeks. It had taken us over a year to learn that music. And so when we were told we couldn't do it, our choir was crushed. The concert ends, a huge standing ovation. They're like heroes there. And Teddy Rhodes reaches behind his back and pulls out this sheet of music. And he says, gets everyone to sit back down. And he says, you know, we were supposed to finish on another number, but the symphony didn't have the music long enough, and I understand that. But I was looking at it, and on the way in the park, I passed another stage with an upright piano, and he said, if we can get to that piano, I think I can play this music. 5,000 people didn't bat an eye. They grabbed their picnic baskets, their blankets, and we all went to that stage, and he played, and our choir with the voices of angels took that place, before right, before wrong, to that place where I am, therefore I think. And that was the moment, the first moment of many, where there is no way I would have taken the pill. So I want to close on a quick poem. And I want to thank you all very much. Working with this theater company, working with the different groups on the fringes that I work with, the arts are so essential. The arts are the grassroots of change, and I firmly believe that. And so this is a final little poem, and it's based on the fact that our planet doesn't have enough minerals to create us as people, so comets had to crash in and asteroids to bring us the carbon base that we have. And so if that's true, we all in this room are pieces of stars. And if that's true, this is a constellation, unique unto itself. And in my time among the constellations, this is what I've learned. I've learned there are families I share my blood and families I would give my blood. I've learned that love thrives in audacity, dies in carelessness, and hides in simple gestures. I've learned knowledge is acquired, but wisdom is recognized. I found there's the trip you plan, but then there's the trip you take. And home has gone from a place that is to one I remember to one I now create, where I know the names of the gods, what's funny, what's edible, what's sacred, and where I will find you. So I'm looking up at the stars, and I know now that though not burning any longer, some still send their light. So I'm looking up to the past and the future. I'm looking up to home. And somewhere between where I stand and they send their light, we meet. Me looking to the heavens and the stars looking down at what it's like to be alive. Thank you.